Before we dive into this story, take a second to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear is one that most people in America have never truly understood. It's dark, it's disturbing, and it's real. If stories about hidden crimes, forgotten history, and dangerous investigations interest you, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because once this story begins, it doesn't let go. The sirens cut through the humid Louisiana night like a blade. Deputy Marcus LeBlanc pressed the accelerator harder as his patrol car sped down the narrow road that sliced through miles of empty farmland. The radio on his dashboard crackled with static and urgent voices. Unit 12, respond immediately. Possible homicide reported near Angola Road. Field worker discovered a body. Marcus tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The road ahead was pitch black, broken only by the sweep of his headlights. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town, there was nothing but darkness, fields, and the distant floodlights of one of the most infamous prisons in America, Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola. The name alone carried weight. Violence, history, fear. Marcus had grown up hearing stories about its stories, whispered by older officers who had spent decades working the prison perimeter. They said Angola wasn't just a prison. It was something darker, something older. Marcus turned onto a gravel access road and saw flashing red and blue lights ahead. Two patrol cars were already parked near the edge of a cotton field, their lights illuminating the tall grass like a stage. He stepped out of his car and immediately felt the thick humidity wrap around him. Sheriff Daniel Crawford stood near the field, speaking with a nervous man in work overalls. "That's him," the man said, pointing toward the rows of cotton. "I swear I didn't touch nothing. I just saw the body and ran." Marcus approached slowly. "What do we have?" he asked. Crawford's face looked grim. "You're not going to like this." They walked through the rows of cotton plants, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. And then Marcus saw it. The body lay half buried between the plants, face turned toward the dirt. The man's prison uniform was stained with mud and blood. Marcus crouched beside him. "Inmate?" he asked quietly. Crawford nodded. "Escape, maybe? Or dumped here?" Marcus turned the body slightly, just enough for the flashlight beam to hit the prisoner's face. He froze. The man's eyes were open, wide with terror. But that wasn't what caught Marcus's attention. It was the mark on the man's neck. A deep bruise, almost shaped like a rope burn. Strangulation. But there was something else. Marcus moved the flashlight lower. The prisoner's hands were bound behind his back with a strip of cloth torn from a prison uniform. "Execution style," Marcus muttered. Crawford exhaled slowly. "That's not the worst part." Marcus looked up. "What do you mean?" The sheriff pointed toward the distance. Across the dark fields, floodlights illuminated towering fences and guard towers. Angola Prison. "This field used to belong to the prison," Crawford said, quietly. Marcus frowned. "What does that matter?" Crawford's voice dropped. "Because this exact spot 200 years ago was part of a slave plantation." Marcus stood there in silence. The wind rustled through the cotton plants. Out here, the past didn't feel far away. It felt buried just beneath the soil. For decades, Angola had been known as one of the toughest prisons in America. Nearly 5,000 inmates, violent offenders, lifers who would never see freedom again. But Angola had another reputation, a darker one. Before it was a prison, it was a plantation worked by enslaved Africans in the 1800s. And when the state turned it into a prison in 1901, something chilling happened. They didn't change much. The prisoners were forced to work the same fields, under armed guards, exactly like the men who had worked them a century earlier. Marcus looked down at the dead inmate again. "Who is he?" Crawford checked a notepad. "Name's Caleb Mercer, 32 years old, serving life." "What for?" "Armed robbery and a double homicide." Marcus studied the man's face. Mercer didn't look like someone who had been on the run. His clothes were clean. His boots weren't muddy, which meant one thing. He didn't escape, Marcus said. Crawford nodded slowly. "No." Marcus looked around the field. The prison fences were only a mile away. Someone brought him here. A forensic unit arrived 20 minutes later. Flash cameras began lighting up the field. Evidence markers appeared around the body. Marcus walked slowly along the rows of cotton. And that's when he saw something strange. Footprints. 2 different sets. One belonged to Mercer. The other belonged to someone else. Someone wearing heavy boots. Boots like the kind worn by correctional officers. Marcus followed the prints carefully. They led away from the body, across the field, toward a dirt road. And parked on that road was something that made Marcus's stomach tighten. A prison transport truck. Empty. He turned to Crawford. When was the last time this vehicle moved? Crawford grabbed the radio. Minutes later, dispatch answered. Transport vehicle number 4 left Angola at 9:10 p.m. Marcus checked his watch. The body had likely been dumped around 9:30. That meant whoever killed Mercer had access to a prison transport truck. Someone inside Angola. Crawford rubbed his jaw. If this is what it looks like, we've got a serious problem. Marcus stared at the towering prison walls in the distance. Floodlights bathed them in cold white light. 5,000 inmates. Hundreds of guards. And somewhere inside that prison, someone had just executed a prisoner and dumped his body in the old plantation fields. Marcus spoke quietly. This wasn't random. Crawford looked at him. What are you thinking? Marcus gestured toward the cotton rows. Someone chose the spot. Crawford frowned. Why? Marcus didn't answer right away. He knelt beside one of the evidence markers again. The rope mark around Mercer's neck. The bound hands. The clean boots. Everything about this scene felt deliberate. Like a message. Then the forensic tech called out from the body. Sheriff, you need to see this. Marcus and Crawford walked back. The technician had lifted Mercer's shirt slightly. Carved into the man's chest, fresh and crude, was a single symbol. 3 letters. Ong. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Because inside Angola Prison, that symbol meant something very specific. It was the mark of a secret inmate gang. A gang that prison officials had insisted for years no longer existed. Marcus looked toward the prison walls again and realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a murder. This was the beginning of something much bigger. And somewhere inside Angola, someone was sending a message. But when investigators finally pulled Mercer's prison records later that night, they discovered something that made the entire case far more dangerous. Caleb Mercer had been scheduled to testify in federal court the next morning against 3 correctional officers, and if what Mercer knew was true, Angola Prison wasn't just violent. It was hiding a secret that could destroy the entire system. By the time the sun rose over the Mississippi River, the fields surrounding Angola looked deceptively peaceful. Morning mist floated above the rows of cotton. Birds circled the distant tree line. From a distance, it looked like any quiet stretch of farmland in rural Louisiana. But the crime scene was still sealed. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind as forensic teams worked through the dirt, carefully collecting every trace of evidence they could find. The body had already been taken away, but the tension in the air remained. Deputy Marcus LeBlanc stood at the edge of the field, staring toward the prison. Angola loomed in the distance like a fortress. Concrete walls, guard towers, miles of razor wire. Inside those walls were nearly 5,000 inmates, many of them serving life sentences for the worst crimes imaginable. But Marcus wasn't thinking about the inmates. He was thinking about the guards. Caleb Mercer had been scheduled to testify in federal court in less than 12 hours. And now he was dead. Sheriff Crawford stepped up beside him, holding a printed report. "You're not going to like this," he said. Marcus sighed. "That's becoming a theme." Crawford handed him the document. Prison transport logs. Vehicle number 4. The same truck found near the crime scene. Signed out by Officer Raymond Pike, Crawford said. Marcus looked up. "Where is he now?" Crawford shook his head slowly. "That's the problem." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his chest. "Don't tell me." Crawford folded his arms. He didn't show up for his shift this morning. Inside Angola Prison, the atmosphere felt different. Heavy, watchful. Marcus passed through the security gates with Sheriff Crawford and 2 state investigators. The steel doors slammed shut behind them with a hollow echo that lingered in the corridor. Warden Thomas Keller was already waiting in his office. Keller had worked in corrections for almost 30 years. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself like a man who believed he controlled everything within these walls. But today, even he looked uneasy. "You're telling me one of my officers is responsible for killing an inmate?" Keller asked sharply. Marcus didn't sit. "We're saying his truck was at the scene." Keller leaned back in his chair. "That doesn't mean he killed Mercer." Crawford slid a photo across the desk, the carved symbol on Mercer's chest. Keller's expression hardened instantly. "Where did you find this?" "On the victim," Marcus said. For a moment, no one spoke. Keller stared at the photograph like he had just seen a ghost. Marcus noticed. "You recognize it." Keller's voice dropped. "That symbol shouldn't exist anymore." Marcus stepped closer. "But it does?" Keller ran a hand across his face. 20 years ago, Angola had a gang problem worse than anything you can imagine. They called themselves the Angola Brotherhood. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "White supremacist?" Keller shook his head. "No, worse." The room went quiet. "They weren't about race," Keller continued. "They were about control." "Control of what?" Crawford asked. "Everything." Keller leaned forward. "Contraband, protection rackets, violence. If something illegal happened in Angola 20 years ago, the Brotherhood was behind it." Marcus folded his arms. "So, what happened to them?" Keller hesitated. "We dismantled them." Marcus stared at him. "You're not convinced." Keller didn't answer. Instead, he reached into a drawer and pulled out an old case file. Dust clung to the edges. He slid it across the desk. Marcus opened it. Inside were crime scene photos, dead inmates, burned cells, brutal assaults. Every image was worse than the last. "This prison nearly collapsed in 2003, Keller said quietly. "The Brotherhood turned Angola into a war zone." Marcus looked at the final page. A list of names, gang leaders, and next to each name, status, deceased. "You killed them," Marcus said. Keller's jaw tightened. "They died during prison riots." Marcus didn't argue, but something about Keller's answer felt rehearsed. Crawford tapped the file. "So, you're telling us this gang disappeared 20 years ago?" "Yes, but the symbol just showed up carved into a murder victim." Keller looked at the photograph again. For the first time since they entered the office, his voice sounded uncertain. "That shouldn't be possible." An hour later, Marcus was walking through cell block C. The noise inside the prison echoed through the concrete halls, shouting inmates, metal doors slamming, guards barking orders. But something about the atmosphere felt off. Inmates watched Marcus as he passed. Not openly, but carefully, like they were studying him, like they knew something he didn't. Marcus stopped beside a guard station. "Where was Mercer housed?" he asked. The guard checked a clipboard. "Block C, row 3. Marcus walked down the row slowly. Cells lined both sides of the corridor, stacked 2 levels high. Men stared from behind the bars. Some looked curious. Others looked hostile. One inmate, however, looked terrified. He was thin, pale, and sitting at the back of his cell, like he was trying to disappear. Marcus stopped. "What's your name?" he asked. The man hesitated. "Derek Lawson." "You knew Mercer?" Lawson swallowed. "Yeah." Marcus glanced around. Other inmates were watching. Closely. Marcus stepped closer to the bars. "What happened to him?" Lawson shook his head quickly. "I can't talk about that." Marcus lowered his voice. "He was scheduled to testify tomorrow." Lawson's eyes widened. "You know about that?" Marcus nodded. Lawson leaned forward slightly. "They weren't supposed to kill him yet." Marcus felt a jolt of adrenaline. "Who?" Lawson glanced up and down the corridor. His voice dropped to a whisper. "The Brotherhood." Marcus stared at him. "That gang died 20 years ago." Lawson shook his head slowly. "No, they just went quiet." Marcus leaned closer. "Who's running it now?" Lawson opened his mouth and suddenly froze. Marcus followed his gaze. At the far end of the corridor stood a correctional officer, watching them. Officer Raymond Pike, the same man who had signed out the transport truck. Marcus's pulse quickened. Pike wasn't missing. He was standing right there. Calm, silent, watching the conversation. Lawson leaned back from the bars, fear spreading across his face. Marcus turned toward Pike, but before he could speak, Pike simply smiled, then turned and walked away down the corridor. Marcus immediately spun back to Lawson. "Talk to me." Lawson's face had gone pale. "You don't understand," he whispered. Marcus felt the tension building. "Explain it to me." Lawson looked toward the corridor again, then leaned forward and said something that made Marcus's blood run cold. "You think the Brotherhood is just inmates?" Marcus frowned. "What are you saying?" Lawson whispered 4 words. "They run the guards too." Marcus felt the weight of that sentence settle in his chest. A prison gang controlling inmates was dangerous, but a gang controlling the guards? That was something else entirely. Marcus stepped back from the cell, because suddenly the entire prison felt different. Not like a place controlled by law, but like a place controlled by something hidden, something organized, something powerful. And somewhere inside these walls, there were people willing to kill to keep it secret. But what Marcus didn't realize yet was this. Caleb Mercer wasn't the first witness scheduled to testify. He was just the first one to die, and within the next 24 hours, someone else inside Angola would disappear. Someone who knew exactly how deep the corruption went. The rain started just after midnight. Heavy drops pounded against the steel roof of the prison transport garage, echoing through the empty building like distant gunshots. The storm rolled across the Louisiana countryside, turning the dirt roads around Angola into rivers of mud. Deputy Marcus LeBlanc sat inside his patrol car near the prison gate, staring at the windshield as rain blurred the lights of the towers ahead. Something inside Angola was wrong. Not just violent, not just corrupt, controlled. Caleb Mercer had been murdered hours before he was supposed to testify in federal court. The symbol carved into his chest had confirmed what the prison administration didn't want to admit. The Angola Brotherhood wasn't gone. It had evolved. And if Derek Lawson was telling the truth, they had allies among the guards. Marcus checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. Sheriff Crawford's voice crackled through the radio. "Marcus, you there?" "Yeah." "You need to come back inside. Now." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What happened? There was a pause on the line. Another witness. Marcus's grip on the radio tightened. "Don't tell me." Crawford finished the sentence quietly. "He's gone." Inside cell block C, chaos had replaced the usual prison routine. Guards were shouting. Cell doors slammed open and shut. Inmates pressed their faces against the bars, sensing something big had just happened. Marcus pushed through the corridor until he reached Crawford. "What's going on?" Crawford pointed toward an empty cell. "That's Lawson's." Marcus felt the chill instantly. The same inmate who had whispered about the Brotherhood. The one who had said the gang controlled the guards. Marcus stepped closer to the cell. The bed was empty. The door hung slightly open. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No noise. "Who opened the cell?" Marcus asked. Crawford shook his head. "No record of it." Marcus turned slowly, scanning the corridor. The guards nearby looked tense, nervous, but one face stood out. Officer Raymond Pike. He stood near the end of the hall, leaning casually against the wall, watching everything unfold. Marcus walked toward him. "You're supposed to be missing," Marcus said. Pike shrugged slightly. "Am I?" Marcus kept his voice steady. "Your truck was used to dump a body in a field tonight." Pike tilted his head. "That's so." Marcus stared directly into his eyes. "Where's Lawson?" Pike's smile faded. "I'm just a guard, deputy. I open doors when I'm told." Marcus felt the words land like a warning. "When you're told by who?" Marcus asked. Pike didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked down the corridor again. And this time, Marcus followed him. The lower levels of Angola were older, much older. Concrete walls stained by decades of humidity. Rusty pipes running along the ceiling. Most of these areas had been sealed years ago, after renovations moved the prison operations above ground. But Pike walked straight toward a locked steel door at the end of the hall. Marcus caught up. Stop. Pike turned slowly. The guard's expression was calm. Too calm. You really want to know what's going on here? Pike asked. Marcus nodded. Yeah. Pike pushed the steel door open. The smell that came out was damp and cold. Then come see. Marcus hesitated for only a second before stepping through. The hallway beyond looked like something from another century. Brick walls, low ceilings, dust-covered lamps. Marcus frowned. What is this place? Pike's voice echoed slightly. The old foundation of the plantation. Marcus's pulse quickened. What? Pike kept walking. Before Angola was a prison, it was one of the largest slave plantations in Louisiana. When they built the prison, they didn't destroy everything underneath. They reached another door. Pike opened it. Marcus stepped inside and stopped. The room was enormous. Stone walls, wooden beams. But what filled the room wasn't old plantation equipment. It was something far more disturbing. Files, boxes, shelves packed with documents, photos, records, thousands of them. Marcus stepped closer. What is this? Pike's voice was quiet. The real Angola. Marcus picked up a folder. Inside were reports. Illegal prison labor, violent cover-ups, guard assaults, deaths labeled as accidents. Decades of corruption. Marcus looked up. You're telling me this prison has been hiding crimes for generations? Pike shook his head. No. Marcus frowned. Then what? Pike's eyes darkened. We've been running it. Marcus felt the truth hit him all at once. The Brotherhood wasn't just inmates. It wasn't even just guards. It was a network, a system, a hidden organization controlling Angola from inside its own walls. Mercer was going to expose you, Marcus said. Pike nodded. So was Lawson. Marcus's heart pounded. Where is he? Pike looked toward the far end of the room. Marcus followed his gaze and saw Derek Lawson, tied to a chair, alive, but terrified. Marcus stepped forward. This ends tonight. Pike laughed softly. You think so? Marcus heard footsteps behind him. He turned. 3 guards had entered a room, each one wearing the same expression. Cold. Controlled. Pike spoke calmly. Angola doesn't survive without us. Marcus looked around the room again. The files, the evidence, the decades of buried crimes. If this gets out, Marcus said, this entire prison collapses. Pike smiled slightly. That's why it won't. Marcus slowly reached toward his belt. But before he could move, Sheriff Crawford's voice shouted from a hallway. State police. Everyone freeze. The room exploded into chaos. Gunfire echoed through the basement. Guards scattered. Marcus rushed forward, cutting Lawson free from the chair. Within minutes, state police officers flooded the underground room. Pike and the other guards were forced to the ground in handcuffs. The Brotherhood was finally exposed. Or, at least, that's what the world believed. 6 months later, the investigation into Angola Prison made national headlines. Multiple guards were arrested. Federal charges were filed. The underground records uncovered decades of corruption. Angola was placed under federal oversight. And for a while, it seemed like the nightmare was over. Deputy Marcus LeBlanc stood once again in the same cotton field where Caleb Mercer's body had been found. The wind moved softly through the plants. The prison towers stood silent in the distance. Sheriff Crawford walked up beside him. Strange place, huh? Marcus nodded. History doesn't disappear, he said. It just waits. Crawford checked his phone. Another update from the federal investigation. Marcus glanced at him. What now? Crawford looked uneasy. They finished reviewing the Brotherhood records. And Crawford exhaled slowly. There were more names. Marcus frowned. How many? Crawford looked toward the prison walls. Enough to run the entire place. Marcus felt the weight of that sentence. Because even after the arrests, even after the investigation, Angola was still Angola. A prison built on the bones of a plantation. A system with secrets buried deep in its foundation. And sometimes, secrets like that never fully they just wait. And if you think this story was intense, you're definitely not ready for the next one. Make sure you subscribe because the next case we uncover might be even darker than this one.